finally some good fucking food. Today, guys, we are going to look at my favourite books so far I've read this year. We are going to review good books for a change. What a change in this channel, a drastic move by me. So, it's about 5 months into the year. I'm gonna do my best and worst books that I've read so far this year. Which is a trend on BookTube, kind of, where you do a list of your favourite books halfway through the year and then at the end of the year. I've read somewhere between 30 and 35 books this year. I'm going to do two videos. I'm going to do one for my best and one for my worst. And in terms of best books, I actually found the list pretty easy to put together. I had some really defined favourites. And my worst list took a little more sort of moving around because I had read a lot of shit that I didn't like. But the stuff that I really liked this year, I think is just fucking mwah! My top 5 is so good. It's so good, oh my god. Right, we're gonna talk about my favourite books now. So let's start with some honourable mentions. I have 2 honourable mentions, which are books that actually came out this year. Right, my first honourable mention is The Jaguar by Sarah Holland Bass. The Jaguar is the winner of this year's Stella Prize, which is the Australian Fiction Award for just women, which, you know, is a concept I dislike. I don't like awards that just award one gender. That's dumb. I think we're past that. But I think this book is really, really good. It's a book of poetry. It's a book of modern poetry. And for a book of modern poetry, you have to cut to the bone in this overcrowded, fucking sensorily overloaded world that we live in. A book of poetry has to cut to the bone and know exactly what a reader's going to take out of it, and the fact that this book of poetry that I'm talking about does is a testament to how good it is. I really like it. It's a book of poetry about a woman coming to terms with her dad's illness and death. Through poetry, and the poetry gets more abstract as it goes on, and you learn more and more details, and the woman's travelling while she writes the poetry, etc. It's really, really good. I really like it. It's a worthy winner of the award. I have a review on my channel where I talk about it. I still don't do it justice in that review, just because I haven't written really detailed notes on it. But it's a very short read. You can probably find it on Kindle. It'll take you like an hour to get through, but it sits with you. It really sits with you. I hope the Stellar Award continues to award books like this and not Drop Bear, which came out last year, which I also talked about, which is the literary equivalent of making a modern art installation by just throwing paint at a wall and then finding out you didn't take the lid off the fucking paint tin. Right, and my other honourable mention is Ninth Building. This is one of the International Booker long-listed books that I like that nobody else does, and that's a very specific type of book, and yet I can fit a lot of shit into it. This book is very boring, no arguments there. This book is very kind of inconsistent, no arguments there. This book is better in some places than others, no arguments there. But I just love what the first half of this book in particular makes me think about. I just love the structure of that first half, and I love how crazy and phonetic it is. Frenetic, can you fucking speak? And I love how the Cultural Revolution is in every part of the first half in a way that doesn't feel ham-fisted. It's just present in the way these characters exist. I love how many characters there are, I love how many themes there are, I love how it's through the view of children, I love how these children view things like death and lying. I love all of that so much, and it feels so true to the author's perspective that when it does get boring, it gets boring in a way where I go, well, if that's how it was for the author, then fine. If the author's going to be that totally honest and that totally transparent that he's like, yeah, this part was boring, so this part of the book is boring, sorry. If he's going to be that honest and transparent about it, then I'm going to be okay with it. It's not like a book where a book is trying to engage you and then is boring, which is bad. This is a book that is trying to be honest, and in places where the honesty shows how boring a situation was and the book is boring, totally fine. I accept that completely. And the second half isn't just boring, it also feels slightly redundant at points because the first half is setting up so much and it's being so big and so bold that when the second half isn't like that, I was kind of missing it a bit. But again, like I said, if the author is being so honest, then it's fine. It's similar and totally antithetical to Standing Heavy, where Standing Heavy has a similar style, but it refuses to let you into the author's perspective. It's really kind of shuts you off. There's a real kind of barrier between what the author's thinking, and it's kind of barriered by an immense amount of allusion and cultural reference and like sort of a real sparsity of character detail. that means that you can't really get into the characters in Standing Heavy the same way that you do to Ninth Building. Well, not the characters, but the situation in the same way as you do in Ninth Building, where you really understand what the author's trying to say. And in Standing Heavy I don't, but I still kind of like that book anyway. That's not on my fucking list. Get that shit away from here. I mean that Ninth Building is, because Ninth Building is banger. It's a banger. I love it. It feels like it took such a pure spotlight. I've read it twice now, and the second time I read it, the issues I had were magnified, but the stuff I love was magnified tenfold. Like, that first half, fuck man, it's so good. I would recommend to anyone who's curious about this book, if you don't like it after the first half, stop. But you should definitely read the first half. It's fucking crazy. I love it. And, I mean, it's too inconsistent and it's too, boring. There are boring bits. The boring bits are too uninvesting at points for me, where I can't put it on my actual list. But there are parts of this book that are better than anything I read this year. Hey, baby, time for number 5. Let's get into my top 5. Number 5 on my list, my 5th favorite book I've read so far this year, is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. I love Russian literature, everyone does. I love it so much. I've read so much Russian literature. That was like my first introduction to really pretentious, to me becoming pretentious, was reading like Dr. Zhivago, and I read War and Peace as well. I have read that, and I just loved reading Russian literature. It all felt so big and so dense and just talking about everything. I read Crime and Punishment, I loved that. And this was just another edition of that, but this book felt a lot darker than some of that other stuff I've read. And just so weird. It's such a weird book, especially for when it was released in the 30s or some shit, that it's crazy that it exists, and I love a lot of it. The Pontius Pilate stuff in this book is my absolute favorite part. I'm not going to get into spoilers, I'm just going to talk about it in a way where people who have read it will understand what I'm saying. The Pontius Pilate stuff is my favorite stuff in the book. I love all that. I love some of the characters in particular. I love when it does get really bold. I love the connections between religious imagery and how much Satan is characterized and how much he's in the book. I thought he was going to be in the book a little bit, really in the background. I wasn't expecting him to become, like, the central focus. That was odd. Mr. Woland, sorry. But he, fucking, like, there's, like, 150, 200 pages where he's, like, the only character in the book, and he's just like, I have this talking cat, and now you all are naked, oh, sorry, it was just a joke, just a prank, guys, I did it for the Vine. Yeah, there's some stuff in this book that lingers with me a lot. I love the decapitation bit at the beginning. I won't get too specific. Again, I love the Pontius Pilate stuff. I love Ivan as a character. He's the guy who ends up in an asylum. Not for the whole book, no spoilers. But he ends up at one point in a lunatic asylum. Ivan's my favorite character. He's the most relatable. He's the most likable. But there are some characters in this that are very distinguishable. I really like the way characters are described in this book. It reminded me a little bit some of the characterization of fathers and sons, particularly in that early, that beginning monologue where it's the two characters talking about, I guess it was fate or something like that. And it reminded me of some of the conversations that exist in that Turgenev book. But this book felt really tongue-in-cheek. I loved a lot of the satire of Russia, but then it kind of turns into being this kind of like dark sort of gothic sort of pseudo-romance about the Master and Margarita. And the Master's like not in the book for the first 150 pages, and then he just kind of pops up. And then you're like, oh, this is the title character. But the way the book changes made me, I don't know, I wasn't in love with the fact that it did both. I wish it just did one. Even though it did both pretty well, it kind of made me think about the first part where it was making fun of Russia and how Russia's all corrupt and thinks it's morally superior and they all value money and stuff like that. And I love all that, but the way that was shown was just with the devil fucking with people, and then it cuts to the devil kind of not really fucking with people anymore, but the way he fucks with people is kind of just like, oh, you're a renter? Well, now you've moved to Uzbekistan, and he like sends someone to a random country. Well, now you're in an asylum, and he just kind of fucks with them. And then the book does that, and then it doesn't do it. It kind of moves into something else. And I don't entirely know how I feel about that. But I love both parts independently of themselves. I'm not really making a lot of sense with what I'm saying, but I just think that I would have liked one of those sections to be the whole book, and then maybe another one of the sections to be kind of like a subplot or something like that. But it really did feel divided. The parts did feel divided in like concept, even. But again, I love the book. And there's some stuff in the book that I continue to think about and smile about, like the way it would cut back to the time of Jesus and stuff like that. Well, it's so fucking crazy. Very crazy book, very zany, bonkers fucking book, especially for the Soviet Union time. I get why this was blacklisted to fuck. Yeah, good book. Me likey. At number 4, I'm gonna cheat because I'm gonna put a whole bunch of books on here. It's everything Annie Ernaux's written. So I've read 4 of her books now. I'm not going to include, I think it's called A Man's Place, because I didn't like that one as much. But I'm going to include The Years, Happening, and Exteriors. I'm going to just put those 3 up as my number 4 place. I made a review on Annie Ernaux as an author. That was kind of my return to YouTube after like 9 months. Nobody saw that, but that's where I talked about her. She won the Nobel Prize last year. She's the best winner of the Nobel Prize, or one of the best winners in the last 10 to 15 years. She's really great. She's not as good as Tokarczuk, who is, but she's one of the best winners. She's up there for sure. And I love how much social battery she has, to the point where it feels like she's going to be relevant and she's going to be talked about 20 or 30 years from now. Not in like a really culturally profound way, but just in a way where it'll feel like she's relevant. Her works will become like museum pieces. They'll become like artworks. She's really great. Really, really love her stuff. And I particularly love how much she's able to cover with the same style. So Happening is similar stylistically and similar in like a level of honesty to The Years, but they're very different in what they're trying to do. And Exteriors as well is kind of different, but it's very similar to The Years. But the way she covers a lot. She covers a lot of ground in her super honest stuff, where it makes it feel like she's lived a very long, fulfilling, detailed life. All 3 of the books I've read from her are really fantastic and hyper-specific and kind of chilly. I think of the 3, I definitely like Exteriors the most. I fucking love that book. I've read that like 3 or 4 times now. It's very small, but I get a lot of humor and kind of heart out of it. I really like it. But her as an author, I think you should definitely check out if you haven't. She's written very short books. They're very easy to read. She has one of the most insane degrees of introspection and confidence as a writer that I've ever seen, and I have to respect her hustle. Always. At number 3 on my list, we have a book I haven't mentioned at all, which is The Siege of Krishnapur by J.G. Farrell, winner of the Booker Prize about... oh my god, it's 50 years ago. It won the Booker Prize 50 years ago. Fuck, I just realized. I loved the shit out of this book. It is really comedic. It's a very funny book, and it's meant to be, but it's very sad. J.G. Farrell's world building is fantastic. He creates the city out of nowhere. It's comparable to Chandrapur from A Passage to India, and the way he characterizes different parts of the city by the way the characters move between them is really good. He has a really great sense of description. I love his world building. I love his characters too. They're really great. He has really good characters. There's kind of... one of the characters you follow is called Flurry, and he's kind of a romantic. He's a bit of a sap. And then another character you follow is called the Collector, and he's in charge of certain parts of the... well, he's not in charge of the city, but he... The way you get different viewpoints between the two is very interesting. When you're in Flurry's perspective, you're getting a certain type of, like, British upper class. You're seeing that upper class elite, but you're also getting the subjectivity of the way they view the world. So whenever you're in a scene with them, they're at a dinner table talking about nothing. They're talking about, oh, I see that the Russians are doing some shit, and isn't communism great? Yes, come here, butler. And then when he moves to a different place and he's talking to people, you get that subjective mindset that he has, where he doesn't necessarily believe in what they're saying, but he does not have the level of awareness and knowledge about the Indians' kind of plight, that he doesn't realize that, and the way he's talking about the world is kind of like ignorant of that. He doesn't even think about it, until he has to, of course. Whereas you have the Collector, and the Collective is more of the objective view of that world, where the second he's introduced, he's like, something weird's going on, something fishy is going on, what the fuck are these biscuits on my desk? Why are there biscuits on my desk? What's going on? Can someone explain stuff to me? And he's like the voice of doom throughout the whole book, and then he's proven right. So he's the objective view where he still doesn't understand how the, like, what India's kind of mindset is, but he can see that something's happening, and the British kind of unawareness of that through the characterization of the British characters was great. They were totally ignorant of what was happening because they were so like bored and lazy of the world they were in, of India, and they were just kind of like sitting around like, isn't this nice, this is so boring, in a way that's similar to A Passage to India. And I know that's the obvious comparison because they're both about British rule in India, but more about the laziness that British people have in India was a really interesting, and I imagine it must have been fiery at the time, a really interesting kind of perspective to have. Yeah, I love this book. That was a bit of a ramble. I don't have any notes on it. But I really like it. When it starts getting fucky, when things start happening, my god, I mean, so exciting. And the characters, you like them. Well, you don't like them as people, but you like them as viewpoints. I loved cutting between them, especially when it got to the thick of the action. I loved it, yeah. Really great, really, really good. This is a fantastic Booker winner, probably one of the best I've ever read. I would really put it up there. I haven't read any more of J.G. Farrell. I'm kind of like, I got some way into the Singapore grip before I stopped, but I'm really excited to read through his stuff, particularly his main trilogy. Fuck yeah, this man bakes, bro, he's good. Number 2 on my list is The Wake by Paul Kingsnorth. This is an insane piece of work. One of the craziest fucking mind-blowing books I might have ever read. This is about a guy, I guess he's a soldier. It's about a soldier after the Battle of Hastings and the Norman invasion of England in about 1066, so what's that, 11th century. And it's after that where he starts a war, a kind of war against the Normans in, I think I read it was the Lincolnshire Fens. And he grabs a couple of mates together and they go to war. I love this book. I did not understand a fucking single paragraph of it. It's written in its own unique style. So it's written in, as I understand it, Old English, but modernized and put into English sentence structure and written in, like, English. It's anglicized properly. And it has its own kind of vocabulary, so it's not even really Old English, but it's written in a way that it's what Old English would sound like if we were to speak it today. It's hard to explain what it is. It's not a type of language that exists. It's its own type of language that the book is written in. So when you look at a page of the book, it looks fucking like that, right? Like, there's no words that are real. And there is a distinct reason for doing that. It's not just to be epic, random, oh, I've written something that's really hard to read, isn't my book good, sort of thing. It's very good at putting you in a headspace. It's really good at making you feel like the main character and feeling this kind of like ancient, long-forgotten way of life and this long-forgotten kind of animal way of viewing the world that really got to me. It's not just written in its own different language, it's written with some like stylistic flourish, so sentences get repeated in callbacks, or even like words get repeated in sentences. Sometimes sentences are really kind of long, or they're like cut short, and it's done in a way where if this was written in English, I would still be picking up those stylistic flourishes as like, wow, that was a really interesting thing to do. It puts you in a crazy headspace where you feel like anything could happen to these characters and you would be fine with it. It feels borderline supernatural and borderline almost like schizophrenic, just in the way that it's like presented. Like, it feels like it's from the mind of someone with schizophrenia. That it totally works. It's like brilliant. It's so good. I would say it's a bit long in the tooth for how much mental work you have to spend reading it. Like, this took me a little under a fortnight to read, and for that length, that's actually quite a long time for me because I had to put in so much effort to understand what was happening. And I was doing that. I wasn't just reading it passively, because you can't. You have to be into it. You have to be totally fixated on it. And when I finished it, I was left just kind of like, wow, that was like really worth doing it. There's so much meat in it. It's so good. And I would recommend it to anyone who likes history and likes a bit of a challenge. Yeah, it's a strong book for sure. I really, really loved it. And it was a total surprise to me. It totally blindsided me. I got 10 pages in and I went, yeah, I'm gonna love this. I might as well just go for it. But so far this year, I've read a book that's even wackier and even more kind of insane in its style and even more personally resonant to me. And it has to be the #1 spot on the list, even though I loved The Wake and I loved Siege of Krishnapur and books like that. My favorite book I've read so far this year is probably going to be my favorite book I will read this year. I can't see anything topping it, and that is Paradise by Fernanda Melchor, baby. She's back. She's a killer. She's a fucking killer of the industry, bro. She has another book coming out. I think it's called This Is Not Miami or something like that. I'm gonna get that shit immediately. I'm so hyped beyond belief. I love her first 2 books more than anything. Think of the way that nearly every woman author writes men, particularly in supporting roles. Aside from Connell in Normal People, every male character that Sally Rooney has written is either like insecure and effete or a cunt. And you know the way that Sally Rooney views men by the way she writes about them in her books, right? You can tell totally the way she thinks about them, where they are in this total duality of like insecure, effete, kind of like I love you, I'm a bit of a romantic actually, or just a dickhead, right? And that is definitely not saying that men can write women better. That's absolutely not true. I have never believed that to be the case. But what I mean is that when a book is able to transcend that gender divide that really does exist in literature between perspective, it becomes like impressive to me. It's another thing that I will like give as praise to a book. All of Fernanda Melchor's male characters fall into the cunt demographic, but they're such extremes. They're so every male character in Hurricane Season is like basically evil, and then the male characters in this book are incels, actual incels.
I'm not an incel, my internet friends called me king, see?
The main character of this book is this sort of overweight, unlikable, kind of acne-ridden, like, boy who's obsessed with this MILF next door, and he's jerking off constantly, and that's all he thinks about, and that's all he talks about. And in his inner monologue, that's all you see. And it gets bleaker from there, and more fucking horrifying. But the reason why Fernanda Melchor is good at doing that, where another author isn't, is because I don't feel like she looks down on these characters, and I'll explain that in a sec. It feels like she's bothering to go to the darkness in these characters in a way that I never see a woman author do for male characters that are like this. If you have a male character from a woman's book that's like an abuser or a rapist or something like that, how rare is it that that author will bother to not humanize them, but bother to try and get in their head in the right way? Whereas Fernanda Melchor feels so unfazed by it. She's just like, right, this character, all he's going to talk about is like jerking off and like strangling this woman and like beating her up and shit like that. It's like if American Psycho was written by a woman. It's like, it would be like, whoa, like fucking crazy to me that they have kind of distilled the essence of a certain type of masculinity because they have bothered to try and go for it. Even if her perspective is like, these men are shit and awful and terrible and that, like no arguments there, but even though she does that, the way she bothers to say that is really genuine and really in its head. And I think that's down to the style as well. It's the fact that she had that style and she had these characters and she had to unite the two in a way that didn't feel forced or like unreasonable or like an uneducated perspective. Any other author would just be like, ew, isn't this gross what he's doing? Ew, it's so gross. What she's doing when she shows these characters like this is she's showing the social decay of her country. Especially in Hurricane Season, that's a better example of that. With the characters, it's about misogyny in, I guess, Mexico. But it's not about that in the way that characters are misogynistic to each other. It's about something more than that. The characters are viewing something else, like there's some other deeper side to it. And it's the same thing with Paradise, where just the fact that these characters are incels and bored and shit like that, it's not looking down on these characters, it's looking down on the society that has, that can be characterized by that. A society where a person like that is normal and someone that you'd see every day. And you wouldn't necessarily know what's going on in their head, but people like that exist in her society, and I believe that Melchor knows that, and that's why she's characterized them the way that she has. But it's showing social decay in like the absolute fucking extreme end, to the point where it isn't even funny, and it isn't even really satirical at that point. It's just horrifying. I love this bone-chilling fucking nightmare fuel that she's really good at. She's really good at hitting you with this chaotic, intense nightmare fuel. That's what she's good at. And part of that is the style. It's like in between extreme first person and stream of consciousness. It's like in that little interim. It's not stream of consciousness, it isn't. It's like the step below that, but it perfectly fits her language choices and her like choices of theme. I finished Hurricane Season and I was just craving more of Melchor's work, and then I read Paradise thinking it was going to be a minor work from her, and now I like it way more than Hurricane Season, honestly. Not way more, but I love it a lot more. Like, I really respect it as well. I love it and respect it dearly. It's my favorite book I've read so far this year. It's an easy 10 out of 10 from me. If I were ever to do an actual review of it properly, I would be giving it a little 10 out of 10 in my little YouTube blurb. I love it so much. I can't wait to read it again. I've got an actual physical copy of it coming soon that I'm then going to read again. I'm going to make my dad read it too. I'm not going to tell him what it's about though. If I ever get around to writing a book of my own, it will absolutely be aping her style. We have a future Nobel laureate here. In like 30 years, she's got it in the bag. I feel so sure of that. She's just so perfect, and she's so what the Nobel Committee are looking for. She could release dog shit the rest of her career, and I would still have more respect for her than 99% of authors because of the 2 fucking masterpieces she has already. It's my favorite book so far this year. If we get anything as good as this again, that I read in like September or some shit, then we'll be having a good fucking year, baby! Anyway, thank you guys for watching this video. Stay tuned for my worst of the year so far that I'll have coming up soon. I guess I'll have some fun just kind of moaning and groaning my way through that. Anyway, thanks guys for watching. I hope I've given some cute little recommendations for you here, and please leave your own recommendations in the comments as well. I can't wait to read what you guys have really loved this year. I love getting recommendations from people. I genuinely do wish list them. I never just go, yeah, that's so interesting, and never read them. I always look that shit up. Whenever a book gets recommended to me, I'm like, I'm on it. So please tell me what you've really loved this year, and yeah, have a good one, guys. Stay tuned for the rest of the year, baby. I will not be going anywhere. Let's go!